Hello everyone. So in this video we'll be talking about physical vapor deposition using evaporation, which is a material deposition technique. Now deposition techniques in general, there are of three types: physical vapor deposition, which can further be classified into two types: sputtering and evaporation. Evaporation can further be of two types: thermal evaporation and electron beam evaporation, and I'll be talking about these two techniques in this video. Electrochemical deposition is another technique that is commonly used for depositing materials like copper and also silver. Chemical vapor deposition is the third technique, which is used for materials like polycrystalline silicon, silicon oxide, tungsten, and other materials. So evaporation is commonly used for depositing metals, and this technique is relatively inexpensive, and that's why it's very popular at universities and small R&D centers. And basically the technique uses either heat or electron beam to evaporate a charged material, and then the vapor of the material that melts sticks to the substrate and solidifies for the deposition to occur. So let's look at this in more detail. So the schematic on the right shows a setup for the evaporation process. As I mentioned before, there are two types of evaporation: thermal evaporation and electron beam evaporation. So the setup for both the types of evaporation look more or less similar. There is a bell jar kind of setup, and you have a crucible inside which holds the charge. The crucible inside can be of high temperature resistant materials such as tungsten or alumina coated tungsten, or it can also be molybdenum. And then you put your charge inside, and inside at the top of this bell jar you have your wafers or samples uh, attached. And once you put the charge, and then you basically pass heat through this crucible, and the heating can be done in uh, basically it's done by passing current through this crucible. uh, Probably it's like hundreds of amps. And basically, if you know this equation, H is equal to I square RT, where H is the heat energy, I is the current, R is the resistance, and T is the time. Basically this is called as resistive heating. And so you basically pass current, melt, create the vapor, and then the vapor goes and sticks to the wafer at the top. And so yeah, this is the basic principle. And also when you're doing thermal evaporation, you have a roughing pump, and also there is a high vacuum pump, a diffusion pump, which is backed by an additional roughing pump. uh, and it basically requires high vacuum, and we'll be talking about this in some of the later slides. One of the main problems with thermal evaporation is that for some materials you might require very high heat energy to melt it. So you'll end up passing a lot of current in order to melt the material. When this happens, it could be possible that even the crucible is melting and evaporating. So this can result in some contamination. So uh, there are two other possibilities where how you can your heat and melt your charge. This through RF heating and electron beam heating. And electron beam heating is very popular, and so that will be the next thing I'll be talking about. So basically, the setup for the e-beam evaporation is very similar to the one shown on the right here. However, the way you heat the crucible is slightly different. So you basically have a electron source, typically a tungsten filament, and then using electron deflectors, and by using a magnetic field, you bend the electrons, and then you make the electrons bombard the top surface of the charged material, and you locally start heating the charged material from the top. So this is actually an important difference, because in the case of thermal evaporation, the crucible heats the charge from the bottom, but in the case of e-beam evaporation, you heat the charged material from the top. And also the crucible is cooled via water at the bottom, so relatively the crucible does not get heated in the case of e-beam evaporation. And because of this, you are basically reducing the contamination that could arise if the crucible gets heated. And one other problem with e-beam evaporation is that since you're using electrons and they are bombarding your charged material, you can generate X-rays, and in some cases the X-rays or even secondary electrons, they can actually bombard onto your substrate above, and they can damage the wafer. Or if you have polymers, you can actually end up cross-linking the polymer. So if you're doing something like metal lift-off, if you cross-link a polymer, metal lift-off might be impossible. And also if you have some porous oxide, then the electrons can actually go and get trapped inside the oxide. So these are some problems that can arise from e-beam evaporation. And another thing that may be of interest is to deposit alloys. So alloys are materials which have two different components. So basically, if you want to deposit alloys through any of the evaporation techniques, then this might be challenging, because usually different materials have different rates of evaporation because they melt at different temperatures. So this may not be possible unless you have an alloy which has all its components evaporating at more or less the same rate. So one possible solution to this could be that, as shown in the right, you can use multiple charge sources and then pass current through each of these multiple sources simultaneously, and then deposit an alloy on your substrate. So basically here, instead of starting with a material or an alloy as your charge, you are starting with the individual components of your alloy, and then you're evaporating each of these components separately and then depositing that on your substrate. Also, if you want to have multiple stacks of different materials, this way of evaporating can also be useful for that. Another important thing is to use process control when you're depositing multiple materials. One way to do this is by using a shutter. Uh, Usually the setup of the PVD use looks something like this. You have a crucible, and then you have your samples at the top, and you also have a shutter that covers the crucible initially. And also you have something called as a quartz crystal microbalance, which is used to measure the thickness. So sometimes you may want to measure the thickness of the material that is being deposited on your samples. So basically QCM is something, it looks something like this, and it based on so this is a material that vibrates, and you can actually measure the vibrations. And when you have more and more material deposited on the QCM, you are dampening the vibrations of uh, this QCM. And because of this, you can actually measure the change in frequency of these vibrations. And this can be correlated to the mass that is being deposited on the samples by using this equation. And typically you have the QCM placed very close to your samples inside the chamber. And usually what people do is they close the shutter and they evaporate the material. And however, the QCM however, you'll see that the shutter is close enough to the samples but far away from the QCM. So the shutter actually closes or covers only the samples and not the QCM. So you will be able to measure the rate of deposition without opening the shutter to your samples. Once you reach the rate that you require, you then open up the shutter to actually deposit the material on the substrate. And these are some examples of how the actual equipment looks. So PVD75 by Kurt Lesker is a very commonly used PVD at universities and for small scale R&Ds. So E-beam setup, as I mentioned before, it looks something like this. And this on the right is an image of a thermal evaporation setup. And usually a tool comes up with multiple boards, and this is how you have the sample holder, shutter, and a substrate typically look like, which is usually at the top. and this is the software interface that is usually. So the software interface, you can see that you can control the roughing pump, turbo pump. You also have a line, and there are multiple tabs where you can control the vacuum for pumping, and then you have the deposition. And as I'll talk about in my next videos, I'll be talking about sputtering, where you'll have to introduce a gas inside the chamber, and you also have an option to rotate the substrate, which is also quite important. So as I mentioned before, you have multiple stages of pumping inside a PVD, and typically for thermal evaporation the pressure you require is around 10 power minus 6 torr, and this usually uses two stages of pumping. First you have a roughing pump which pumps down to around 10 power minus 3 torr, and then you use a diffusion pump, turbo pump or cryo pump in order to reduce the pressure further down to 10 power minus 6 torr. So this is actually quite important in the case of thermal evaporation, because if you require higher deposition rates and lower contamination, you actually require much higher vacuum, and this in theory is dependent on the mean free path, or mean free path can be defined as the distance two adjacent molecules travel before they collide. And mean free path is given by this formula, lambda is equal to kt by root 2 pi p d square, where t is the chamber temperature, p is the chamber pressure, d is the average gas molecule diameter, which ranges usually between 2 to 5 angstroms. So if you do the calculations in the case of thermal evaporation, if you assume the pressure to be 10 power minus 6 torr, and if you assume the diameter to be around 2 angstroms, the mean free path is around 175 nanometers. 175 meters, which is actually much larger than the distance between the uh, between your crucible and your wafer. So you can assume that when you're doing thermal evaporation, because of this very high vacuum, the you can assume that two adjacent molecules won't collide with each other, and this is actually quite important in the case of thermal evaporation. And another important thing in case of thermal evaporation is the concept of step coverage. So as I mentioned before in my first video, you have wafers inside a bell jar as shown here. So the angle at which the material gets deposited can actually be different for different substrates, depending on where they are positioned inside the chamber. So sometimes you can have a vertical deposition, so that kind of deposits something like this. But some of the wafers, you'll see that they have this kind of angled deposition, so they can result in non-uniform deposition. So one way to improve this is to rotate the wafer. As I mentioned before, the PVDs actually have this substrate holder which can actually be rotated at a required speed. So when you have a rotation, your deposition profile might be something like this. And another way to improve would be to heat your substrate, but heating must be done very carefully because it can result in extensive grain growth that can actually damage your quality, that can also degrade the quality of your deposition. Additionally, in certain situations when you do metal lift off, you might actually want a vertical deposition because once you do the deposition, you do something called metal lift off, where you actually require some parts of the sides not to be covered, because if you have an angle deposition, you might end up covering the sides. So when you're doing metal deposition, the green region over here is actually a polymer. So when you do lift off, what you do is you actually put this after deposition into a solvent, and the solvent actually attacks the polymer from the sides through these openings, and they actually dissolve the polymer, and they remove the polymer as well as the metal that's deposited on top of the polymer. However, the metal that is sticking to the substrate actually remain. So once you do the lift off, you get metal deposited only in the uncovered regions. So if you have a angle deposition, then you'll end up covering the sides, and so this will result in poor metal liftoff. So step coverage can actually be quite important depending on what your final goal is. Thank you.